My stepmother stole 11 years of my life and then walked into my law firm expecting me to save hers. She sat down across from my desk, folded her hands like she was at a garden party, and told me she needed the best attorney in the building. What she didn't know was that she was already sitting in front of one, and that I owned the entire floor. Let me back up. My name is Madeline, and I am 32 years old. I am a licensed attorney and the founding partner of a boutique estate litigation firm in downtown Atlanta. We specialize in contested wills, trust disputes, and what the legal community politely calls family wealth conflicts, which is really just a fancy term for what happens when people who never deserved money try to take it from people who did. Before I tell you what happened, the afternoon my stepmother walked through my front door, I need you to understand where I came from, because the version of me sitting behind that mahogany desk did not arrive there by accident. I was built in a pressure cooker, and the woman who turned up the heat was the same woman who showed up needing my help. My father remarried when I was 9 years old. My biological mother had passed away from a sudden illness the winter before, and I think my father was drowning in grief so fast that he grabbed the first hand extended to him without looking too closely at whose hand it was. Her name was Cecilia. I always called her that, never Mom, a boundary she resented from the very first week. She had a daughter of her own from a previous marriage, a girl 2 years older than me named Petra. And no, before you ask, they were not good people dressed up in complicated circumstances. They were exactly what they appeared to be. From the time I was 10 until I left for college, I lived in a house where I was treated like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Not dramatically, not in ways that were obvious to outsiders. That's the insidious part about this kind of family. There were no bruises. There were no screaming matches that the neighbors could hear. It was quieter than that and somehow more damaging. My stepsister got the larger bedroom when we moved into the new house. She got the newer laptop when school started. She got dance lessons, sat tutoring, a brand new car on her 16th birthday. I got hand-me-down textbooks and a strong suggestion that I apply for financial aid. My father worked long hours. He was an architectural engineer and genuinely talented at his job, genuinely useless at noticing what happened inside his own home. He wanted peace. He wanted to believe he had given his grieving daughter a stable family. So he believed what Cecilia told him, which was that I was adjusting well, that I was just a naturally independent child, that the distance between us was normal teenage development rather than a calculated slow erasure. The real turn came when I was 17. My maternal grandmother passed away and left behind a modest but meaningful estate, her house in Savannah, a small investment account, and specific written instructions that everything go to me when I turned 25. She had never trusted Cecilia. She told me so herself, sitting on her porch the summer before she got sick. She said, "Baby, I am going to make sure that woman cannot touch what belongs to you." She was careful, but she was not careful enough. What I didn't discover until years later, after I had graduated law school and started pulling on every loose thread I could find, was that within 6 months of my grandmother's death, Cecilia had quietly approached the estate attorney handling the trust and presented a document claiming my grandmother had changed her mind about the disbursement timeline. The document gave Cecilia co-trustee authority over the account until I turned 30. She used that access over the next several years to drain the investment account in small, calculated withdrawals disguised as maintenance fees and estate management costs on the Savannah property. By the time I turned 25 and tried to claim my inheritance, there was almost nothing left. The house had been sold, the account had approximately $4,000 in it, and Cecilia had a paper trail that looked, to anyone who didn't know what to look for, perfectly legal. I was 25, working 80-hour weeks as a first-year associate at a litigation firm, and I had just discovered that the woman who spent a decade treating me like a burden had also stolen the financial foundation my grandmother tried to leave me. I did not cry. I went back to the office and I worked until 3 in the morning studying estate fraud case law. My father, when I eventually told him what I found, said he was sure there was a reasonable explanation. That Cecilia would never do something like that. That I had always had a complicated relationship with her and maybe I was reading the situation wrong. That was the last real conversation he and I had. He made his choice that day, and it was not me. So I made mine. I stopped calling, I stopped attending holidays. I focused entirely on building the kind of legal expertise that would ensure no one could ever manipulate a document in front of me again without me seeing it coming from 10 steps away. By the time I was 29, I had made partner at my firm. By 31, I had left to start my own practice. By 32, I had 6 attorneys working under me, a reputation in the Atlanta legal community that opened doors before I even knocked on them, and a corner office on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street with a view of the city that made me stop and breathe every single morning. I also quietly owned 3 other things that would become relevant very shortly. The afternoon Cecilia walked into my firm, I was reviewing a deposition transcript and eating a very mediocre sandwich at my desk. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Yolanda who has an almost supernatural ability to read a room, appeared in my doorway with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was somewhere between professional composure and personal alarm. "There's a woman here without an appointment," Yolanda said carefully. "She says she's a family referral. She's asking specifically for the founding partner." A pause. "I recognized her from the photo on your credenza." I set down my sandwich. "Which photo?" "The one of you and your father. From before." I had exactly 4 seconds to decide how I wanted to handle what was about to happen. I could have Yolanda send her away. I could excuse myself through the back hallway and never surface. I could handle this the way I had handled everything since I was 9 years old, which was to step quietly out of the way and absorb the damage alone. Instead, I straightened my jacket, picked up my legal pad, and said, "Send her in." Cecilia had aged, though not poorly. She was 61, and dressed the way she always dressed when she wanted to impress people. Structured blazer, pearl earrings, good shoes. She walked into my office and took in the room before she looked at me, which told me exactly what she valued. The framed bar admission certificates, the shelves of legal volumes, the corner windows. Then she looked at me, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved across her face that she immediately controlled. Recognition, recalculation. "Madeline," she said, as if we had spoken last week. "Have a seat," I said. She sat. She placed her designer bag in her lap with the particular care of a woman who was about to perform. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," she said. "I almost didn't. What can I do for you?" She took a breath and launched into it. Her delivery was polished, almost rehearsed, which told me she had been practicing on the drive over. The situation, she explained, was deeply unfair. Her daughter, my stepsister, was in the middle of a contentious divorce. Her soon-to-be ex-husband was a man named Broderick, and Broderick had hired an aggressive attorney who was going after every marital asset with what Cecilia described as a vendetta: the house, the joint accounts, even the small boutique my stepsister had opened 3 years ago using, and here Cecilia's voice dropped just slightly. "Family money. Family money," I repeated. Yes, money that was always intended for her, that had been set aside years ago for her future. Cecilia's eyes stayed perfectly steady on mine. "We need someone who can protect those assets, someone who understands estate documentation and how to argue for the intent behind a fund transfer, not just the mechanics." I looked at her for a long moment. The legal question she was describing, how to protect a discretionary asset transfer from a divorcing spouse's claim, was genuinely within my area of expertise, which she obviously knew because she had clearly done her research before coming here. She had chosen this firm deliberately. She had chosen me deliberately, either banking on the fact that I would feel compelled by blood and history, or that I would have no idea who she was until she was already sitting in my office. "Tell me about the fund transfer," I said. "When did it occur?" She described it. Approximately $78,000 moved from a shared account into a separate vehicle for my stepsister approximately 14 months ago, before the marriage began to deteriorate. I wrote a number on my legal pad. I let the silence sit. "Is your daughter here?" I asked. "She's waiting downstairs." She was nervous to come up. "Call her up," I said. "I'd like to speak with both of you." My stepsister, when she appeared in my doorway 7 minutes later, had the particular energy of someone who had spent years being told she was special and was now encountering a world that disagreed. She was 34, 2 years older than me, and she had the look of someone who had just been crying before she carefully reapplied her mascara. She stopped in the doorway when she saw me clearly, and her expression went through 3 distinct phases in under 2 seconds: surprise, discomfort, and then a determined reset into something she probably thought looked confident. "Madeline," she said. "Sit down," I said, the same way I had said it to her mother. She sat. Cecilia reached over and briefly touched her daughter's hand, a gesture of reassurance. I noticed my stepsister did not look reassured. "Before we go any further," I said, setting down my pen, "I want to be transparent about something. You came to this firm because of my reputation in estate and trust litigation. I understand that, but I want to make sure we're all operating with the same information in this room." I looked at Cecilia. "The fund transfer you're describing, $78,000, moved 14 months ago. That's going to require documentation. The source of those funds is going to matter enormously in the divorce proceeding. Broderick's attorney is going to trace it. That's not a question of if, it's a question of when." I paused. "And when they trace it, the question will become whether those funds were legitimately earned and legitimately given, or whether they originated somewhere that creates a legal problem." Cecilia's expression didn't change. "They were family funds. They came from savings." "Whose savings?" "Ours. Mine." I opened the folder I had placed on my desk before they arrived. I had put it there purely as a physical prop at first. It was an unrelated case file, but now I slid it aside and pulled out a single piece of paper instead. It was a printout I had made 3 years ago and kept in a file I rarely opened. A forensic accounting summary from the investigation I had quietly commissioned into my grandmother's estate. It listed, line by line, the withdrawals Cecilia had made over the course of 7 years from the investment account. The total came to a number just over $86,000. I placed it face up on the desk between us. Cecilia looked at it. The color in her face did not drain dramatically like in a movie. It went still instead, like a photograph of a person rather than a person. "I have had this for 3 years," I said conversationally. "I want you to understand that coming into my office today and asking me to help protect funds that I have strong reason to believe originated from my grandmother's stolen estate, from my inheritance, is a very specific kind of audacity. I want to acknowledge it because I think it deserves acknowledgement." My stepsister's head turned slowly toward her mother. "Mom, what is that?" Cecilia said nothing. "What is that document?" Her voice had gone very quiet. "That's Grandma Dorothy's estate account. That's, Mom, those are withdrawals." "That's, how much is that?" $86,412, I said. "Over 7 years. Average withdrawal of just under $1,200, timed to avoid the reporting threshold. Very careful, genuinely impressive from a technical standpoint." Cecilia turned her gaze back to me. When she finally spoke, her voice was composed in a way that I recognized because I had watched her do it my entire childhood. It was the voice she used when she was being caught and had decided to reframe rather than retreat. "You cannot prove intent," she said. "Those were legitimate estate management fees. I was co-trustee. I had legal authority. You had co-trustee authority that was granted through a document that 3 separate handwriting analysts have now independently concluded shows signs of modification," I said, "specifically in the section establishing your role and the scope of your authority. My grandmother's signature on page 4 appears inconsistent with her documented signature from the same year on other notarized instruments." The room was very quiet. "I'm not here to relitigate the past," I continued. "That ship has also mostly sailed in terms of criminal statute of limitations, which you probably know, or you wouldn't have felt comfortable walking in here. But I want you to understand exactly where you're sitting right now and exactly what I know before we talk about what happens next." My stepsister looked like she might be sick. She was gripping the strap of her bag with both hands and staring at a fixed point on my desk. "I didn't know," she said, to no one in particular. "I didn't know where the money came from. She told me it was from savings, she said it was set aside for my future." "I believe you," I said. And I did. Whatever my stepsister was, and she was not a person I had ever liked or been particularly kind to, I had no evidence she was aware of the mechanics of what her mother had done. She had just benefited from it, which was its own kind of complicity, but not the deliberate kind. I looked at Cecilia. Here's what I can tell you about your daughter's divorce case. Based on what you've described, Broderick's attorney is going to argue that the $78,000 transfer was a fraudulent conveyance, assets moved to avoid division in a divorce. That's a winnable argument for him, and whether or not he wins depends heavily on the documented source of those funds. If that source traces back to an estate account that itself has legal questions surrounding it, you are not just looking at losing the asset in the divorce. You are looking at potentially opening a chain of inquiry that no one in this room wants opened. Cecilia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I am not going to represent your daughter, I said. I have a conflict of interest that I am professionally obligated to disclose, and that would disqualify me regardless. But I'm going to give you a referral to a good family law attorney down the street who can help her navigate the divorce itself. What I would strongly suggest, in the meantime, is that you do not attempt to move or liquidate any additional assets, do not destroy or modify any documentation, and do not approach any other attorney in this city without being transparent about the chain of custody for these funds. I slid a business card across the desk. Not mine, the referral. Cecilia didn't pick it up immediately. She was looking at me with an expression I had spent a long time imagining confronting in my head, usually late at night after a bad day. Now that it was in front of me, it was less satisfying and more simply factual. She had underestimated me at 9 years old, and she was still doing it at 61. You're not going to do anything with what you have, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I already told you what I'm doing with it, I said. I'm disclosing a conflict and referring you out. That's my professional obligation, and I'm meeting it. But the document is 3 years old and lives in my files, I said, where it will continue to live. I'm not your enemy, Cecilia. I'm your former stepchild who grew up in a house where the heat was always turned down in my bathroom first, and the printer always seemed to be out of ink when I needed it for school, and the good winter coat was always just slightly too expensive. I picked up my pen. I built this anyway. You don't have the power to threaten what I've built, and you never did. That's all. She picked up the business card. She stood. My stepsister stood beside her, and they moved toward the door, and I thought that was how it would end, quietly, with a referral card and a closed file. Then Cecilia stopped. She turned around in the doorway with the particular composure of a woman who cannot leave a room without having the last word, even when the last word is going to cost her. Your father asks about you, she said. He misses you. I looked at her. When he's ready to call me himself, he knows my number, I said. Close the door on your way out. Yolanda appeared at my doorway approximately 45 seconds after they left. She was holding a fresh cup of coffee and wearing an expression of tremendous professional restraint. Do I want to know? She asked. Probably not. I accepted the coffee. Can you clear my 3 o'clock? I need to make a call. The call was to Jonathan, my estate attorney, who had been holding a particular piece of paperwork on my behalf for several weeks while I decided what to do with it. It was a donation agreement. The Savannah house, my grandmother's house, the one Cecilia had sold during her years as co-trustee, was no longer recoverable. But the address 2 blocks from it, a small community building that had been sitting vacant for 8 months, had come on the market recently at a price that made it accessible. I had been sitting on the paperwork because I hadn't been sure of my own motivations, and I needed to be sure before I signed anything. I didn't want to do it out of anger or as a performance. I wanted to do it because it was right. Talking to Cecilia that afternoon clarified something for me. Not because she said anything meaningful or because the confrontation provided some cinematic resolution. It clarified things because she was so entirely unchanged. She had walked into my office with the same calculation she had operated on for 30 years, slightly repackaged, and it had simply stopped working. Not because I had finally beaten her at something, because I had stopped being a variable in her equation altogether. I was not there to be manipulated or won over or threatened. I was just a person at a desk with a referral card, and she was just a woman who was going to have a difficult few months ahead of her. The paperwork I signed that evening donated the community building to a nonprofit that provided legal aid services to young adults navigating estate disputes without representation, specifically, young people who had aged out of foster care or been cut off from family resources and needed someone to read a document on their behalf before they signed away something that belonged to them. I had my grandmother's name carved into the small plaque beside the front door. 3 months later, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Cecilia was in the middle of her own legal difficulties, not related to anything I had done, but a natural consequence of the inquiry Broderick's attorney had opened and the thread he had kept pulling. My stepsister's divorce was finalized. The boutique was classified as a marital asset and divided. The source of the transferred funds was flagged in the proceedings and referred to a probate investigator. I did not testify, I did not submit documents, I was not involved. The equation resolved itself without me, which is often how it goes when someone has been running a system built on paper and performance rather than anything solid. My father called me on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in a client meeting and let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 47 seconds long, which I know because I checked before I listened to it. He said he had heard some things. He said he wasn't sure what to think. He said he missed me and he hoped I was well and that if I ever wanted to talk, he'd be there. I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. I don't know if I'll call him back. Some doors are worth reopening, and some have been closed long enough that the frame has warped. I'm not in a hurry to decide. I have a firm to run, and a building to manage, and a plaque in Savannah with my grandmother's name on it, and for right now, that feels like enough. What I know for certain is this: the people who told me I needed their roof over my head and their approval in my corner to survive in the world were wrong. They were not wrong because I'm exceptional or because I was dealt a lucky hand. They were wrong because survival has never actually required their participation. It required mine. If you have ever been handed a lesser version of what was meant for you, a smaller room, a borrowed coat, a drained account, a closed door, and you have been building quietly in the margins ever since, keep going. You do not need their acknowledgement to own what you've built. The most satisfying moment of my career was not winning a case. It was watching a woman who had spent 2 decades underestimating me pick up a business card from my desk and walk out of my office. If someone in your life has convinced you that your success depends on their blessing, drop a comment and tell me how you're proving them wrong. Subscribe if this story found you at the right time. Your restoration is already in progress, you just have to keep showing up to build it.